As social distancing measures and self-isolation measures continue in the UK, we've had an update to what is and what is not allowed in terms of lettings and managing properties. So this is really important for landlords to understand, so they understand what their lettings agent can and can't do, and also how that may impact some of their obligations overall. But also this is important for anyone who might be self-managing lettings or maybe running a rent-to-rent or serviced accommodation portfolio. Now, there was an announcement just today, as I'm recording this video, that the government would like us to not conduct any home moves for the next couple of months in direct response to the coronavirus outbreak. So obviously that's a big impact, although I wonder whether there will be some relaxation of that if it's a home move that needs to happen, say around key workers and things like that, specifically going to work at certain hospitals and things. So we're waiting to see whether there are any kind of exceptions and things like that. But if we look at what they've said right now, what that means for managing tenancies, managing people in rental properties, that means that the role of a lettings agent at this stage, or anyone managing properties right now, is making sure that they keep up with their legal obligations, that they make sure tenants are kept safe in their properties, but there's not a lot of new business that's going to be going on for the short term. Now, what can be done at this stage is any emergency or essential repairs and maintenance. So we're talking about things like gas safety certificates, we're talking about things like dealing with water leaks, boiler faults, loss of power. These things should be still going on at this point in time because they're essential to the tenant being able to stay in the property and therefore social distance from the rest of society. Okay, so ultimately we've got to keep people comfortable, healthy within their properties at this stage. So essential repairs and maintenance should still go on. For those who've got HMOs in their portfolio, that extends to things like mandatory electrical checks, fire alarm checks, emergency lighting checks as well. What does need to happen with that essential or emergency repairs and maintenance is all reasonable steps must be taken to continue with that self-isolation and that social distancing as well. So what that means is, as much as possible, this must be arranged in such a way that any contractors, any lettings agency staff, or yourself as a landlord if you need to go to the property, minimises contact as much as possible with tenants. So in the example of a HMO, you might announce that you're going to do a visit, or a contractor is going to do a visit to check the fire alarm system, for example. So you would tell all the tenants ultimately to stay in their rooms while the contractor only accesses the communal areas to do the checks that they need to do to ensure the fire alarm system is working correctly. That's the type of thing that they're looking at. For a gas safety certificate, the tenant may unlock the door to allow the plumber access to the property and then go and stay in another room closed away while the plumber does what they need to do in order to do that gas safety certificate. And the same procedure goes for other elements, other emergency repairs or maintenance that has to happen during this time. Now, if it's a case that a tenant is self-isolating because they're one of the vulnerable tenants, so one of this 1.5 million at-risk people that the government has written to and said you need to self-isolate, you need to be away from everybody else for your own health for the next 12 weeks, or it's a case that someone is unwell with the coronavirus or suspects they have the coronavirus and they're in self-isolation, then at that stage there, even if this is an essential or an emergency repair, if it would sort of break that self-isolation and there's no practical way to get around that, then that can be deferred. And this really refers to things like safety checks, like gas safety, electrical safety inspections and things like that. They can be deferred, but some evidence needs to be kept of why they were deferred, because a lot of these are legal requirements for landlords to do, and then they should be done as soon as possible once it's safe to do so. Now, obviously, some emergency repairs can't wait, and you would need to work out a way to do them that doesn't break self-isolation. That would sort of be things like if there was a water leak, if there was a loss of power or water or heating in a property, we need to balance this situation, because a vulnerable tenant, someone who's ill at this time, we can't really leave them without heat or without power in their property. So even though there's very strict rules around self-isolation, that would be a case where a contractor does need to go into the property to restore power, to restore heat, to deal with any water leak, to keep that tenant safe. What does need to effectively not happen at this point in time is any non-essential repairs and maintenance. So while it would be frustrating to any of us for there to be a dripping tap in a property right now, or maybe a problem with a flush on a toilet, or things like door handles need to be screwed back, basic repairs and maintenance at this stage, they're not essential. They don't stop the tenant from using their property, so all of those should be rescheduled to after the government announces a relaxation of any of the lockdown measures that we're in at the moment. So all of those are kind of deferred to later on. Now, lettings agents or landlords or yourself, if you're self-managing any of these properties, should be keeping a log of any repairs and maintenance. So as soon as it's practical, these things can be done at a later stage, but they shouldn't be done now under the current government restrictions. Okay. One of the other things, cleaning in HMOs likely breaks the social distancing guidelines as well. So if you do have, and this goes for things like serviced accommodation as well, if you do have regular cleaning visits, if there's tenants in the property, really looking at the rules at the moment, cleaning visits and things like that shouldn't go ahead because it's putting the cleaning staff at risk. It's putting the tenants at risk as well. Now, ultimately, you should be encouraging tenants to keep properties clean and tidy anyway, to clean up after themselves. But cleaning is one of those things that sort of sits in that non-essential side. One of the things you could consider as a landlord, if you want to at this time, especially if maybe you've got slightly more vulnerable tenants in your HMOs, is can you have some cleaning products delivered to the HMO to help them clean up after themselves at this point in time, to stay on top of things. So things like some hand sanitizer, which they could put in the communal area, some antibacterial sprays and things like that, so that they can self-manage a little bit. But looking at where it stands at the moment, kind of regular cleaning visits and things like that probably don't really fit where the property is occupied. Obviously, if the property is unoccupied and there's no one in there, then it would still be appropriate for cleaning to happen. So if it was a case that someone had moved out and a clean needed to happen sort of post-tenancy or something like that, that could still occur because there's no kind of contact or human interaction. That doesn't breach the self-isolation or social distancing rules at this stage. Okay, so just make sure you're practical about these things. Make sure that with repairs and maintenance, anything that is essential or is emergency still gets done, but gets done in such a way that you limit the contact between the person doing the repair and the person who's in the property at that stage. And this also means simple things. To do, say, a gas safety check, the lettings agency doesn't need to accompany the plumber to do that. So it should just be the plumber, and it should be well announced so that the plumber and the tenant can distance themselves from each other within the property as well. So it's just being practical and pragmatic about these things and storing up anything that's not urgent to be done once the lockdown measures are relaxed a little bit, hopefully sooner rather than later.